Dear students, welcome to the session on Database Management System. The topic of the session is Entity Relationship Model, which is a kind of data model used in databases. The outcome of this unit is to construct the entity relationship model for obtaining the structure of a database. And at the end of the session, you will be able to explain the basic concepts of the entity relationship model. So this is an example for entity relationship model or a representation of the ER model, where you have the entities which represents the objects of the database, and when you have two or more objects or the entities, we'll be establishing a relationship R between the entities A and B. And each of these entities will have attributes that represents the properties of this entity. For an example, if you have a university database and inside which you may have any number of entities like student, instructor, project, etc. Here, consider that the entity A is a student and entity B is a instructor. Then the relationship between the student and the instructor will be advisor or something like that, because the instructor will advise the students. And the attributes of a student may be name, roll number, age, etc. Similarly, for the instructor, it can be the employee ID and experience, age, etc. So this is how an ER model will look like. So this is example where the student and the course are the entities, and you have a relationship between the student and the course where the student enrolls for the course. The attributes of the student are student ID and age, and the course is having the attributes course ID and credits. So the oval shaped things represent the attribute, and the diamond shaped thing represents the relationship, and the rectangles represent the entities. This entity relationship model was developed to facilitate the database design by allowing the specification of an enterprise schema that represents the overall logical structure of a database. In order to get a design of the database, we usually go for this entity relationship model. So this ER model facilitates to understand what is the actual specification of the database. The ER model is useful in mapping the meanings of the interactions of real-world enterprises onto a conceptual schema. The ER model employs three important and the basic concepts, that is the entities, relationships, and the attributes. The set of all entities of a database are called as entity sets, and the set of all relations of a database are called as relationship sets, and the attributes are the properties of the entities which we have discussed. Going deep, this ER model uses a collection of basic objects called entities and the relationship among these entities. The objects, real world objects, are called as entities, and the relationships between these objects are modeled in this entity relationship model. An entity is a thing or an object in a real world that is distinguishable from other objects. Like student is an entity, instructor is an entity, course is an entity, project is an entity, and so on. For example, each person is an entity, and the bank accounts can be considered as entities, and so on. Based on your scenario, you can choose your entity. The entities are described by a set of attributes like what you had for student. It is student ID, marks, age, etc. The attributes name, ID, and salary describe an instructor entity. So this is not limited to 3 such attributes. You can have n number of attributes. The relationship is an association among several entities. So two or more entities are related together with the help of a relationship between them. The set of all entities of the same type are said to be or grouped to be the entity set. The set of all relationships of the same type are grouped into a relationship set. The overall logical structure or the schema of the database can be expressed graphically by a ER diagram or the entity relationship diagram. So when you have studied your programming, you might have studied before going for programming, you might be designing or coming with the design of the program. Similarly, for designing before establishing the database, we are going for that design which is done with the help of entity relationship diagram. So this describes the logical structure of the database graphically. There are several ways in which you can draw these diagrams, and one of the popular tool or the language used for this modeling is Unified Modeling Language. All these pictures, the diagrams are from the Unified Modeling Language. This is a simple or sample ER diagram. This is from the university database, and you have two entities, instructor and department. So the entity sets are represented by rectangular box with the entity set name in the header and attributes listed below it. So this is an entity for instructor, and this is the name of the entity which is inside a rectangular box, and this rectangular box is divided into two parts. The header is having the name of the entity and the attributes are listed here. And similarly, department is the name of one more entity, and we have department name, building, budget, etc., which are the attributes of this particular entity, department. Relationships are represented by a diamond connecting a pair of related entity set. So this instructor and department are connected by a relationship called as member. Instructor is a member of this particular department. The name of the relationship is placed inside the diamond. So we have ID, name, salary, which are said to be the attributes. This is the name of the entity, and this diamond represents the relationship between the entities. The ER model represents certain constraints to which the contents of the database must conform. For example, you may have some constraints like the gender of a student can be either male or female. Like that, you will be having some constraints. In case of account, there will be a constraint like the savings account balance should not fall below 500. Similarly, there will be a lot of constraints, and the ER model can also represent the constraints to which this content of the database must conform. One important constraint, one type of constraint is a mapping cardinality, which expresses the number of entities to which another entity can be associated via a relationship set. For example, how many instructors can be associated with a department? How many students can be advised by an instructor? Like that, there will be a constraint on the participation, that is the number of entities to which another entity can be associated with the help of a relationship. For example, if each instructor must be associated with only a single department, that can also be done as a constraint in the ER model. There can be a constraint like there should be only one associated department for each and every instructor. That can be best described in your ER model. So there are a lot of things that can be explored and designed with the help of ER model. Summary: we have thrown a light on the ER model, what is meant by ER model, and we have discussed what is meant by entity and what are the attributes of entity, how to establish a relationship between the entities, and what are the entity sets and the relationship sets, and we have seen a sample ER diagram, and we have discussed about UML, which stands for Unified Modeling Language, which can be used to design this ER model. This is the reference book, Database System Design Concepts, 6th edition. Thank you.